and be like, nothing is more important right now than this 5 minutes. So I'm glad you're here. I am, yes, here in my mobile office. Hey, Abby. Thanks you guys for joining me. Hey, Jacqueline, thanks for being here. I'm glad you guys could come this morning, whether you're catching this live or you're catching it later on Instagram TV. I hope that it's helpful to you. We are talking about the rules of engagement in the kingdom of God, the habits that Jesus has set out for us in his teaching and in what he's modeled in his life that actually give us a way to enter into the world today, a way to enter into our lives today with habits for our flourishing, habits for our joy and our peace. And we are wrapping up those 7 habits today. If you've missed any of them, you can find them all on Instagram TV or on my YouTube channel. They're all pretty brief, but I actually made you a very, very beautiful, really very, very complex visual aid for this morning. I just want to show you guys for myself to remember those 7 habits. And this is the ones that we have talked about so far. And we are going to talk about this last kind of aspirational ways, which is discernment. What does it look like to be a person who lives with discernment? And I'm looking at Matthew chapter 7, basing this habit on what Jesus taught throughout the chapter. And we only have a few minutes together. This deserves so much more time, but I'm going to give you just the briefest flyover of what it looks like to be a person who lives with discernment. So here's my definition of discernment. It is the ability to make the right decision for the right reason at the right time. It is R cubed. The ability to make the right decision for the right reason with the right motivation at the right time. And all of chapter 7 is about this ability. It's a sort of aspirational. Jesus is circling back on everything he said. If you're living with heart integrity, if you're living with word integrity, if your motivation is love and generosity, if your habits are in the right place, if your priorities are in the right place, then you will be a person who is able to do this. But what's so challenging about chapter 7, and you may be very familiar with a bunch of these snippets from chapter 7. Let me just give you a quick brief flyover in case you're watching this on your way to work. Chapter 7 opens with do not judge lest you be judged. It then moves to ask and you will receive. Then you hear, hey, not everyone can enter the kingdom of heaven. Enter through the narrow gate. Jesus talks about the difference between true and false prophets. These are all things that you may have heard before, but maybe you didn't know that they were all smashed together. And so when I look at chapter 7 all together, and I'm like, what is the pattern here? What's interesting is that I feel like Jesus is separating judgment and discernment. So the chapter opens with do not judge lest you be judged. And most of us, if you're taking the Bible seriously, you should be like, that should give you a hard stop, because you're probably thinking like I do, like, how am I supposed to live like that? Don't I have to be a person who's able to make judgments? I think Jesus is using this idea a little bit differently here, because I think there is a difference between judgment and being a wise and discerning person. When I think of the word judgment, what I think about is sitting in the seat of power where you are making a conviction on behalf of another person. So as you're engaging with the world, as you're engaging in relationships, judgment is sitting in the seat where you are taking on the power of convicting someone of their life, of their decisions that they've made, of saying, I'm going to take the whole of who this person is and I'm going to land a conviction upon them. And that's actually what Jesus says that we're not to do, that we're not to judge that way. It doesn't mean that we're not wise. It doesn't mean that we're not discerning. It doesn't mean that we don't have healthy boundaries with people. It doesn't mean that sometimes there needs to be distance. It doesn't mean that we don't speak out against injustice or sin or things that are not right. But it does mean that we don't put ourselves in the position where it is my ultimate job to judge whether this person is good or evil, to judge whether this person is right or not. Does that make sense? It's a little bit different, but something happens in my heart that's different when I think about the difference between judgment and discernment. Judgment is saying, I'm going to take on the power of God to convict a person of their whole personhood. Y'all know we do this all the time. Discernment is the ability to make the right decision for the right reason at the right time, which is why I think Jesus backs up the do not judge passage with the ask and you will receive. What would it be like to let God hold on to the judgment seat and remain in a position where you are asking and receiving from that whom actually does know all, who will redeem all, who will judge all? What would it be like to stay in that position where, hey, it's not my job to convict this person in my life of their right and wrong, but it is my job to ask God to give me the ability to make the right decision about this relationship for the right reasons, love, generosity, at the right time. And what we see Jesus do is live this out through his life. If you study the way that Jesus interacts with people, he is the ultimate example of this kind of discernment. There's times where Jesus is like all about the boundaries, and he's like, hey, he says to his, mom, who are my mothers and brothers? He doesn't respond to them. There's times where Jesus convicts Pharisees in a sense of saying, hey, away from me, evildoers. There's times when Jesus is silent in the face of injustice. I mean, Jesus was silent all the way to the cross. So Jesus actually gives us this example of what discernment can look like. Discernment is the ability to make the right decision for the right reason at the right time. This is an aspirational habit. Everything that Jesus has been teaching up to this time leads to this idea that this is the kind of life that we can live. We can actually live with joy and peace, with wisdom and discernment when we are engaging with the kingdom of God in this way. So when we look at this last chapter, my favorite sort of little ending to this whole idea is that Jesus gives this little story about wise and foolish builders. And so he's wrapping up his sermon, all these habits that we've talked about. And he says, hey, anyone who puts my words into practice is like a wise builder who builds on a solid foundation. And I love that idea of practice. Jesus says, when you're putting my words into practice, not when you're putting my words into perfection. If we could take that idea into our life and say, this is practice, not perfection. This is practice, not perfection. I'm not going to be a 100% discerning person today, but I can practice that habit. I can practice the habit of heart integrity, of word integrity, of love and generosity, all these habits that we've talked about. And that's what Jesus is asking us to do. He's saying it's actually wise when you take my words and you're putting them into practice. That will lead you to this aspirational habit of the ability to have discernment. So as you go into your day and you engage with people, keep that R3 idea in mind, the right decision for the right reason at the right time. And when you get all three of those aligned, you can just sort of step confidently into your role in the kingdom of God, your little, sort of light that you're taking everywhere you go today. So thanks you guys for joining me this morning. If you missed any of the 7 habits, you can catch them on Instagram TV. I made you a playlist on YouTube so you can catch them, sort of find them easily just by searching my name on YouTube. And I will be back here tomorrow morning at 8. We're going to start a new series as we walk together into Christmas. I am so excited about what God has for us in the next 10 days. Thank you for making this time. I hope that this is helpful for you as you go engage with your life. And I love our time together. I will see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock.